In modern war, attention is a currency. Iran is dominating the news right now, but there are dozens more armed conflicts happening, many of which you've probably heard little to nothing about. The lack of visibility has consequences. Without coverage, there's no public pressure or diplomacy, and in that vacuum, the killing continues. So we want to look at two things: why some wars become global stories yet others stay invisible, and what it actually takes to get a conflict in the news cycle. I've been speaking to two people who've thought deeply about this. Matthew Leake is a journalist and researcher at the Reuters Institute at Oxford University. He's been examining why some conflicts fail to break through internationally. And Lydia Namubiru is the editor-in-chief of The Continent, a highly respected Pan-African publication that has built its reputation on locally rooted, independent journalism from across the continent. To start, one major challenge for most people is even getting your head around what exactly is going on with these conflicts.
If you think last year, by some estimates, there were up to 60 states-based conflicts, so conflicts actually involving countries. And I honestly think that I would struggle to name more than just a handful. I'm quite an avid news consumer, so in theory, someone like me should kind of be aware of these various conflicts that are going on in the world. And I think the fact that I don't probably proves that potentially lots of other people don't. So I would say that most conflicts are actually going under the radar right now.
And it's largely due to proximity.
Most people in the world learn about Africa from somebody who looked in, rather than somebody who lives here or somebody in particular who is living through that situation or knew the place before it was on.
So in reality, even for the bigger conflicts, news coverage isn't necessarily proportional to a war's casualties, whether it's the 600,000 killed in the Tigray war in Ethiopia or the staggering numbers of deaths, displacements, and starving in Sudan. I'm talking millions. You wouldn't feel the severity if you followed mainstream news coverage.
I think it is what editors think their audience is and the limits of that audience to care beyond itself, right? As I think the general knowledge, the old and still standing knowledge, is that people care first and foremost about themselves, and their interest in themselves and the person who looks like them or lives like them is endless. But their interest in the other is very, very short and will run out really, really quickly that they'll get fatigued.
A big part of this comes down to, and I am generalizing here across the West and across Western news media, but I think there is sort of an implied hierarchy of visibility. And I think those victims of war who are seen as having more in common with white Western Europeans are afforded more news coverage and afforded more visibility in Western news media than those who were seen as not culturally proximate to news consumers in the West.
I think it's a bit of a dated reading of audiences and their interests, and also how far they'll stretch in their interests from what they are currently already interested in.
Still, war makes it to the news agenda, and very regularly. News outlets see value in the coverage. They work to translate these issues for the public's understanding, yet they're making constant choices along the way about what's deserving of coverage, as one study found.
Conflicts between countries tended to get more coverage than conflicts happening within countries. Within a single country, so civil conflict. So, for example, like an interstate conflict between the US and Iran would get more coverage than a civil war in Africa. And I think the reason for this is that the interstate conflicts are assumed to have a greater impact on the global economy, and eventually that will trickle down into the household budgets of people in the West. Whereas I think there's this idea that with conflicts in Africa, it's just Africans killing Africans, and I think that's not only an immoral stance, it's also wrong. I think if you look at the war in Sudan, in many ways it's a proxy war involving many countries in the wider region. This is not something happening and being influenced by within the borders of Sudan. You have the UAE, which has been accused of funding one of the main warring parties. You've also got Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Chad. It's not just a Sudanese issue.
And a lot of that even stems from the very people who make up the newsroom and set the agenda, deciding which stories are covered and how.
So I think part of that, again, is like global media often is not nearly as diverse as the places it needs to explain. And when you try then to build that diversity in the moment of the news, then you just like oversimplify, or you just like platforming the loudest, not the smartest or most nuanced people. You're platforming the people who are most likely to be self-promoting.
There are further layers to the issue, though. War is in itself a heavy topic, one that audiences increasingly find rather difficult to follow.
So according to the Reuters Institute data, around 40% of people sometimes or often avoid the news. And often it's because they find the news depressing. It has a negative effect on their mood. So news organizations are kind of wrestling with these kind of issues all the time, and this kind of feeds into what they decide to devote resources to and what they decide to bring to their readers' attention.
And part of that involves the art of storytelling, news as being about actual humans and not mere statistics.
I was sit at my desk and read all the news that's coming out of Iran and how every place is bombed out and stuff like that, and then commission a story from an Iranian inside Iran. And they describe, coming across a roadblock, returning from a housewarming party in Tehran. It was like, I have to stop and say, oh, I didn't realize people were still going to housewarming, like that kind of thing is happening. So I think that's part of, again, our failure is to humanize people, is that looking in from the outside.
One way forward could also be about hearing more from the ground, voices of journalists from and in the affected areas, perspectives that are not usually amplified. That's something Lydia and Namubiru's team at the Continent is trying to promote.
So actually all of our reporting is by contributors in the countries. We're pitching and we're letting what those people pitch, what they say, is worth covering in their country, be how we make editorial decisions, or how we start to make editorial decisions. So we do have, our entire team is editors, and our entire reporting team is distributed across the continent.
Local journalists across Africa have a huge role to play. And in fact, I think they have the primary role to play in getting the truth out about what's really happening in Africa. And we can talk about the role of Western news media, but I really think Western news coverage of these conflicts in Africa will be improved a lot by supporting partnerships with local journalists in Africa. And that's what the journalists in Africa who I spoke to, that's what they said. They said, Western news organizations need to really strengthen the partnerships with local journalists, because those are the people they're on the ground. They understand the nuances of these situations in a lot more depth than we do in the West, and they need to be supported.
This makes one thing clear. Attention isn't neutral. Which wars we see and which we don't shapes what gets understood and what gets acted on. Many of these conflicts aren't ignored because they don't matter, but because attention is limited and uneven. And as we've heard, that can change through more sustained coverage, valuing local voices, and accepting complexity. Thanks for watching, and let us know what you think.